welcome to another episode of the Moxie Podcast. This is episode 16, recorded on Monday, June 16th, 2014. This is the companion web show to the Moxie Sessions, which is an internet economy discussion group which is held once a month in Auckland, New Zealand. Our aim is to bring together a group of interesting technophiles from across the economy to talk about how New Zealand can take advantage of the internet to improve its economic performance. I'm Glenn Williams with you here in London, and as always I have a fantastic panel of guests to discuss today's topic, and I'll introduce them very, very shortly to you. The last Moxie session was held it was actually all about clusters, collaboration and co-working, and it was held in Auckland at Grid AKL, or Grid Auckland, which is the innovation precinct at the Wynyard Quarter, which is a fairly new thing down there in the Wynyard Quarter near the waterfront. Now, it's the perfect place to discuss this topic as well, because it's all about, of course, bringing people together in a physical context, but in the technology kind of sector of the economy. So how is New Zealand going at clustering and building a coherent, connected tech ecosystem? And what can we do to work together better? And if bigger cities are ever more important as centres of economic activity, what are the implications for a country like New Zealand? So let's introduce the panel of experts on the show today who were at the Moxie session and are joining me on this podcast. First up, it's Patrick McVeigh, who is the General Manager responsible for economic growth at Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development. That's the organisation, or ATED for short. Now, prior to being at ATED, Patrick also led the preparation of London's economic development strategy during his time with the London Development Agency. Patrick is going to be looking at and building the case for having clusters. Welcome to the show to you, Patrick.
Hi Glenn, good morning.
And he's with us in Auckland. Good to have you. Joining Patrick is the Chief Economist at the Auckland Council, Jeff Cooper, who will be looking at the role of cities and the value of having populations clustered together. He's joining us just in audio today. Welcome to you, Jeff.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks to all of you and everyone else as well.
Lovely to have you here. We also have Anna Gunther, who is co-founder of the extremely successful and homegrown crowdfunding website pledgeme.co.nz. Anna has a history in economic development, including a stint with NZTE. She returned to study to do a master's in entrepreneurship, and that's where she wrote about crowdfunding and then decided to build a platform. Anna will be talking about why sharing is really, really great. Welcome to the show, Anna.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, good to have you. Slight delay there with Anna, but hopefully that'll sort out. So let's dive right into it. We are talking about clusters, collaboration and co-working. Now, Patrick, you were at the first, you were up first at the session. So can I get you to give us an overview of what you talked about at the session?
Sure, happy to, Glenn. So one of the points that I was trying to make was I think we have to be really careful when we use terms like clusters and cluster development when we're talking about economic development interventions. It's really clear that there are numerous examples across the world of functioning clusters that can actually deliver real economic transformation in their localities. But you have to be quite, I think, sensitive to the idea that you can, through the efforts of the public sector, create a cluster. And I think that we also have to be very conscious of that the outcome of any of that type of activity is not necessarily the formation of a recognized cluster. Really what we're looking for is employment growth, job creation, exporting, etc. So I think one of the dangers sometimes when we talk about clusters and cluster development is it's got a slight sort of branding issue that people get concerned by that as the particular outcome rather than what we're trying to achieve. And if we look at the project, the Grid AKL in the Wynyard Quarter, what we're really trying to achieve is connectivity, greater collaboration, greater opportunities for collisions to occur that create innovation and new ideas transferring. So the approach that we've taken very much in building the innovation district within sort of the Wynyard Quarter is to create those opportunities for people to come together, which is in itself obviously a form of clustering, but it's based around that whole notion of growing more connections, more connectivity, more collisions across the ecosystem.
Let's now hear from Jeff. Now, at the session, you were talking about the value of cities and why they're so important for fostering growth. Can you give us a rundown on your talk, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started a little bit about talking about the advance of China, actually, and some of the cities that we're starting to see there, and putting that in the context of Auckland and New Zealand. I mean, I think cities are becoming the new medium of exchange around the world. You know, for the first time, we're seeing that 50% of the world's population is living in urban spaces, and the reason that this is happening is because people are more productive in cities. Innovation rates are higher. We see that patents are more frequent in cities. These sorts of things. You know, if the rest of New Zealand was as productive as Auckland, then New Zealand's GDP would be in the order of 27% higher. So, you know, there are reasons why, good economic reasons why cities are beginning to become the new medium of exchange around the world. And the challenge for New Zealand really is to start investing in its cities so that it can compete with this new movement. You know, I particularly talked about China because it is frequently, we think about it as a country of cities of production, but increasingly they too are becoming, really nice consumption cities that will increasingly start to compete with New Zealand. So unless we are able to become a country of cities that can compete in the world, we're going to struggle. And I think this sort of gets to the essence of what we mean by clusters. It's centres of innovation, really, and we need to invest in those centres.
But also centres of population as well.
Well, that's right. I mean, people move to places for very good reasons, and one of those reasons is access to employment, access to good amenities, urban spaces, these sorts of things. And, while cities are growing and getting more productive, that will tend to increase the number of people who want to come to them. One of the flip sides to that, of course, is, and often is not talked about as much, is that, these centres of density that pull people towards them create costs as well, things like congestion costs and environmental costs and high house prices. And so in some ways, the biggest challenge for a local government is to manage these costs and make sure that they don't become greater than the agglomeration benefits and the productivity benefits that come about because of density.
It's interesting, Jeff. Have you been looking at cities in almost in the context of them being a living entity and like themselves, and almost an organic? All the small parts make up a one giant kind of organic, moving sort of powerhouse.
Yeah, well, they are. I mean, I guess that's why I talk about consumption cities and production cities. It's only until recently, really, that people have made choices about where they live based on, urban amenity and schools or good transport, these sorts of things. In the past, it was solely in order to get access to jobs and employment, but that is changing a great deal, and it's part. All the pieces of the puzzle are starting to move a little bit, and that was, we've seen that in the 20th century, and it's starting to magnify in the 21st century.
It's a really interesting way of looking at it. Thanks, Jeff. Now to Anna. Now you were looking at crowdfunding and the sharing economy. Anna, can you give us a rundown on your thoughts from the Moxie session?
Yeah, so I really talked about how technology can be used and is used to increase efficiencies, and that's why it's easier to collaborate through using it. And that's what we're seeing in the crowdfunding space. You give people a really easy ask to collaborate around one idea, and they can make a decision using funding. We also talked a little bit about how technology should be used to enhance community and not replace it. So it's just another way to show the community that you're a part of. And also talk how better decisions actually come from more diverse conversations. So how do you increase collaboration with folk that you don't normally collaborate with? And I think the final point that I really made was this idea that collaboration's great, but it's only great if it's there for a purpose. So you need a catalyst or a reason to be collaborating, right. And it needs to be really action driven.
So that's okay. That's really interesting. Let's keep talking to that. This whole online and sort of offline collaboration. I mean, isn't it surprising in 2014 that physical collaboration is still as important as ever as now the online?
You can understand that though, because you still need to be making relationships and connecting with people, and that often is easier in the offline world. But we are seeing huge advances in technology that enable you to collaborate online, be it crowdfunding or be it, the likes of Lumio, where you can make online decisions really easily as a group. But it doesn't replace the need to connect offline. I think.
Yeah, right. So is it still the case that you wouldn't necessarily collaborate with people that you haven't met before? You still need to kind of press the flesh, as it were?
I think you need a really good reason to collaborate if you didn't know each other or you hadn't met in person before.
Right.
I'm not saying there aren't times when that definitely makes sense, especially around certain issues that people are passionate about. But I still think there is that, there is still something really important about offline time.
Yeah. Is that how you feel as well, Patrick? Is that why these hubs like the new Grid AKL hub in Auckland, is that why that's important, that these like-minded businesses need to be clustered around together?
Yeah, I mean, I think both Anna and Jeff make some quite good and relevant points here. I mean, I think we're still social beings as human beings, and you do need that physical interaction. I think Anna makes a good point that maybe if you've got a group of people that have a shared or common interest, it's easier to go straight to a digital interaction. But actually, in many instances, building the sort of social bonds and building the ties that come with that can then be reinforced by technology afterwards. It raises an important point about how you sort of curate the type of environments where you're looking to get greater collaboration and connectivity. And that's one of the things that we put quite a lot of kind of consideration into around the grid, because it's not just enough to kind of create a nice workspace and throw people together and assume that those collisions will occur. You do actually need to take an active role in trying to curate those connections to ensure that collaboration becomes a sort of a standard way of operating, but also can be leveraged for business benefits. So one of the things we have within the first building within the innovation precinct, we have community managers. What might have been previously looked at in a traditional office sense as someone that was the office manager. But the community manager is much more about trying to make those connections between the different companies in the space. We've now got 11 companies set up in this first building. It's only a first step of a much broader precinct that needs to be built out, but building that culture of collaboration and curating that environment from the outset is one of the things that's going to hopefully create some ongoing benefits of having these types of spaces.
I think the point that Anna makes there is quite an interesting one. I mean, I think that, in some ways, this ease of communication is the great paradox of cities, right? I mean, on the one hand, we're starting to see more and more people crowd into fewer and fewer areas. And you made the point before that it's the biggest cities that are growing the fastest. So we tend to be clustering more rather than less. But at the same time, we seem to have quite a reduction in, the costs of being able to talk to each other. And I think it does get to Patrick's point that at the end of the day, we're sort of social beings and we like to be in communication with each other. And there's some times where, I think that, communication like this works out better. But, when we look across the economy, there are a number of sectors which really show that they really do need face-to-face communication. You think about banks, or you think about the stock exchange, the trading floor, where people are really close to one another and need real-time information as soon as possible. There's no doubt that that's more important for some sectors than other sectors.
Which is odd to think, especially when you're talking about the share market, when they are just not dealing with anything physical. It is just numbers on a screen, and yet they all need to be in the same room. It's a strange social kind of, it's ingrained in our DNA, perhaps.
Well, that's right. I mean, an interesting experiment would be, could you do that all online? And I suspect it would be very difficult, because you're trading information so quickly, and you're reading people's expressions as well, and that's the sort of stuff that you really can't get unless you're face to face. But it's in some sectors you don't see it. It's not so important. Sectors like manufacturing or agriculture, where land tends to be more important. In cities, we see the sort of sectors that that value knowledge more than they value space, and that's the sort of sectors, the IT sectors that Patrick's talking about here, where we're starting to see firms come to places like Grid AKL. Are those sorts of sectors where knowledge is really important. But increasingly, I think around the world we're seeing that the returns to knowledge, the returns to innovation are so high now, and that's why we're starting to see firms take very seriously the need to co-locate next to other firms. And that's, at its heart, that's what's driving cities to become more important now than they have been in the past.
But at the same time, with this technology, that we're seeing this, this call to telecommute and not be in the office. Will that be seen as some kind of early failed experiment?
Well, I think at its heart, I think that these sorts of technologies are complements to proximity rather than substitutes of proximity, and I think that's what the research sort of tells us in this space, is that it tends to be, looking at, for instance, who you communicate with on platforms like Facebook. It tends to be people that you're in reasonably good contact with on a reasonable basis anyway, and so it's a complement to that face-to-face activity anyway, I think. So there are, you've mentioned some there, telecommunicating, being at home. It tends to be that people are home maybe for 1 or 2 days a week, but they'll come into the office for the other remaining amount of time. So again, it's a complement rather than a substitute, and I think it needs to be looked that way.
Anna, have you got some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think especially what we do, we're so passionate about this idea of local being really important and having these offline communities as well as supporting them online. I do think that, people that are telecommuting, Jeff is right, they are telecommuting at some points, but that doesn't replace the need to connect face-to-face every now and then. And it doesn't replace the need to still put time into making sure they are connecting as people as well as doing the work together. One thing that came out of our session last week, though, which is a slight move on from what we've been talking about, but I thought it was really interesting that someone mentioned, a lot of the simple problems in the world have been fixed, and now we're trying to fix complex problems, and the only way to work on complex issues is actually to collaborate, because we need a lot of different thinking and a lot of different people working on these issues. And I thought that made a lot of sense with this idea of collaboration being really important. As the world becomes more complex, we need more people thinking together.
Some interesting points from me from that as well, which came out in the discussion. Very much this idea that technology isn't a substitute, and I think it didn't. A lot of the early noise around teleworking was how it was going to change, commuter patterns and all these types of things, and that people, you would have a different demand for office space, etc. Quite often it means that people just can work in multiple locations and perhaps can work for too many hours during the day because it's so easy to be able to stay in touch. But it does give a degree of flexibility, but people still want that face-to-face interaction. I think the other thing that's quite important that came out in the discussion was this idea about not creating monocultures as well. So when we kind of get groups of companies together, whether they kind of cluster together, it's not looking at it from a very narrow sector angle. It's actually thinking on a broader technology as a platform for all businesses and all sectors. And the interaction between small entrepreneurial tech-based startups, they need to actually have the ability to engage with larger corporate customers, commercial services, etc. And again, it's something which probably reinforces this notion of agglomeration in central business districts, where you do have typically will have a mixture of different types of businesses and sectors, and that creates, again, opportunities for cross-fertilization and pollination of different ideas between sectors, individuals and companies.
Yeah, so looking at Auckland in particular, Auckland has a fantastic mix of cultures, very diverse place. But is the collaboration that's going on, is it diverse in itself as well? At the moment, and does online collaboration make it more or less diverse, or just the same? Anyone got some thoughts on that?
One of Auckland's most important advantages is its diversity, and its diversity is changing terrifically at the moment. Having a look back at the last couple of censuses, it is becoming a truly, globally diverse city. but I don't think that we are taking advantage of what that has to offer. You often see that different ethnic groups tend to cluster themselves, and so one of the challenges is actually trying to get that cross-fertilization that Patrick talks about. And what does that mean in terms of your city design? How do you try and create those connections and those accidental run-ins that create ideas? Again, going back to some of these Chinese cities, that really is the future of cities happening over there. As we talk, cities are being created on a daily basis, and we have a huge amount of people that have connections to that area of the world, and we need to be sort of utilizing those and embracing those, I think. But I think we've got a long way to go.
So has the idea of a global village really taken off at all?
In Auckland it certainly has. I think we're trying to understand as I say, exactly how to take advantage of that. Patrick, you may have some thoughts on that coming from ATEED.
Yeah, I think the global village clearly exists. I think the question that arises, and one that I think Jeff alludes to, is whether everybody has equal access to that village. So there certainly is a very kind of global and interconnected space now, and places becoming less of an issue, and there is the ability of companies and individuals to kind of move around. But is everybody connected into that? Are we getting the full benefits of that competitive advantage of diversity that exists? And undoubtedly, where you do seek to create greater collaborations, one of the things I guess we all have to be conscious of is that in doing so, we don't put up artificial barriers or real barriers to people entering and kind of playing in those groups. And it's something which we probably all have to be thinking about in terms of how do we ensure that the opportunities that have been created by collaboration are open to everybody.
Go ahead, Anna.
I think one of the things that Jeff said that really struck me is that we do tend to cluster with people that we feel similar to, but that one of the most important things about fostering collaboration is trying to get those diverse conversations so you can make better decisions. But I think that all comes down to, at the end of the day, yes, you do need a catalyst. You need a reason to be collaborating. Otherwise, you're just talking with a lot of people for the sake of talking with them. Last session, Jeff made the comment or the question, was it possible to collaborate with your competition? And I just thought that was true. You could collaborate with competition, especially around specific issues and problems that you all might be facing. But that you do need to leave space for the competition as well.
Right. We got that, and that's one thing I know that you've been. That's one thing you've been looking at, Anna, is this idea of sharing, which to a lot of people would seem kind of a little bit scary and a little bit, sort of anti-productive. Really, sort of. There's, I think, perhaps in New Zealand we have this idea that sharing is a sort of a scary thing. You don't want too many people to know about what you're up to or what your idea is, but you think that should be the opposite. There should be more sharing of ideas and getting plans out there and more assistance.
I definitely believe that there's a lot of room to share, because then you can actually build something better, either together or in competition. The quote that sharing is the new buying, according to Fast Company.
Thanks for that, Anna. Now a question raised at the session was whether New Zealanders ourselves have sufficient ambition to actually really make a dent in the world. Patrick, your thoughts on that? Being someone from outside the country yourself, what are your thoughts on New Zealanders and whether or not they're ambitious people?
So a couple of things. I think New Zealanders are very visible on the world stage. I think we always talk about the country sort of punching far above its weight. So if it's ingrained, the whole OE experience, and people will actually go and spend time and engage fairly easily in other cultures, and that's one of the things that I think enables New Zealand to play a much greater role on the world stage than perhaps the size of the country you would expect to see. I think a couple of other things around that, though, linked to that, the issue about the size of the domestic market means that for actually companies to grow, they do have to be thinking globally from day one and be looking at those export markets. that's becoming, I think, easier as not only do we have a series of very strong sort of free trade agreements, but the ability to, distance is becoming less of an issue as both technology improves and kind of connectivity in terms of flight paths, flight routes, etc. have improved. One of my observations would be that New Zealanders are they're very connected. I think for a small country, again, probably because of that, there's low barriers to entry in terms of people forming relationships and being connected, but they're not perhaps as collaborative as they perhaps need to be moving forward. So people are really good at getting on, but they still like to be able to solve the problems themselves, and that's one of the things I guess that we're increasingly trying to address when we think particularly about the app-based economy and how, as Anna said, you'll get a better product, a better idea if you can share it.
I just want to finish on a focus with Auckland, seeing as we've got Jeff here as well. Jeff, what are the challenges to growing Auckland and making it a more collaborative place in your point of view?
There's different answers to that depending on what point of view you put forward. But from a local government and public policy perspective, we need to work out congestion and we need to work out how to bring down house prices, because when you think about it, house prices are one of the great barriers for people coming to cities. Auckland's house prices are extraordinarily high. And they do prohibit people taking part and gaining access to those higher wages. And so I think that there's a couple of really big things that need to be addressed at a sort of more local level. I think it's about creating livable spaces, urban places where people can sit and be comfortable in and want to be in. And we're starting to see some of that happen in some of our town centres in Auckland. And I think perhaps the best example of that is downtown Britomart area, where we're starting to see a really cool urban space coming together there, and something that I think all Aucklanders can be proud of. But we're starting to see the restaurants, the cafes, and behind that the IT, the banks coming in there is becoming a real centre of economic activity, and I think sort of paves the way forward for Auckland. But as I say, if congestion continues to increase and really erode some of those benefits of proximity, and house prices get too high, we'll start to see Auckland go backwards.
Well, I think we should wrap this one up. It's been fantastic having our panel of guests talk through the topic today. We've been looking at clusters, collaboration and co-working, particularly in Auckland, but also online as well across the country and around the world. We've been with Patrick McVeigh, who is at ATEED. Patrick, if people want to catch up with what you're up to online and follow your thoughts throughout the day, where can they find you?
Obviously there's the ATEED website, aucklandnz.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Patrick McVeigh.
Now, Jeff Cooper, who is the chief economist at Auckland Council. I've done some Googling of you, Jeff. You're a hard man to find online, so what's the best place to go?
It's just aucklandcouncil.govt.nz/chief economist.
Do you put out like regular reports or do you do columns in the paper or that sort of thing?
Yeah, we've done all of our information's up on that website. So we do columns in the paper. We do an Auckland Economic Quarterly, which tracks sort of city-based issues in the Auckland economy, and then we do a publication on housing called Housing Matters in
Brilliant.
Auckland as well.
Okay, all right. Well, Anna Gunther has also been with us as well, co-founder of pledgeme.co.nz. So that's where you can go. Where else, Anna, online?
Follow us on Twitter at pledgeme. We talk about a lot of stuff there.
Brilliant. At pledgeme on Twitter. And we did get that, yes. So thank you very much to you guys for being on the show. You can go along and find this in video form or in audio up at themoxiesessions.co.nz. Also, you can find all the archives of all the previous shows, plus the transcripts, as well as the links to the write-ups and the NBR that Vaughan Davis does as well. So it's all there for the taking. Don't forget to subscribe to the show as well up at themoxiesessions.co.nz. I'm Glenn Williams with you here in London. That has been the Moxie Podcast, episode 16. Until next time, see you.